deal. All right, thanks everybody. So yeah, as Reed said, my name is Mark Ramberg, responsible for our business development and strategy efforts in the media industry. So, you've heard it all day today about the importance of the partner ecosystem for Amazon Web Services, and I really can't underscore that enough. Many of the great solutions that you've heard about today are really, built out through our partner ecosystem and because of customers that need those solutions. One of the first things that I do when I go and talk to the big media customers is ask them, what partners are you using? And we make sure that those partners are then enabled on AWS. One of the things, an analogy that I've used in the past, and I'll use it again right now, you maybe remember there's a company, BASF. They used to have a tagline, maybe they still do. It says, we don't make a lot of the products you buy, we make a lot of the products you buy better. And I think that's really applicable for the same thing that Amazon Web Services provides to all of our partners. We're kind of the guys behind the curtain that enable partners to build out these awesome solutions on top of Amazon infrastructure. So today, I want to talk about a few different things, really kind of focusing on the delivery or the distribution aspects. So we've gone through storage and processing and the other aspects of kind of a media workflow. I'm going to spend some time talking about the distribution side of things. So when you talk about distribution, we're really trying to figure out how to solve the problem of how do I get my content out to every device on the planet. So you want to have this consumption model where it's any content, anytime, anywhere, any device. You need an infrastructure behind that to make that happen. It maybe sounds pretty simple to make that happen, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes. Now, just kind of quickly, there it goes, whoops. So we kind of have three sections here. We're going to be talking a little bit about our content delivery network, CloudFront. Then we're going to have the UFC team get up here and talk about how they're using Amazon Web Services to solve some of their problems. And then I'm going to go back and also talk about some best practices around streaming architectures. And at the end, I'm hoping to show you kind of a cool demo of a service. Well, I don't know if it's a service, but a very cool demo that launched today at the end. So we'll get around to that in a minute. One thing that Reed did touch on, and I want to kind of highlight this, I think most of you know that today's event is being streamed live. It's being put on by some great partners of ours, Beyond Home Productions and iStream Planet. These guys have done a great job, and this event is actually streaming live through our CloudFront product that I'm going to talk to you about in just a minute. So, content delivery network. So, Amazon has a content delivery network called CloudFront. So, CloudFront really is that last mile of how you get your content out to the end users, out to the customers, the viewers. Whoops, did that switch? There we go. I think the big thing about content distribution is really trying to make sure that you have a scalable infrastructure for delivering to millions and millions of customers if you have those customers. So traditionally in streaming, in order to reach large audiences, you would basically have to build out a fleet of origin servers to get that scale. Content delivery networks really enable you to provide the scale at the edge with content delivery edge nodes that are closest to your end users. So CloudFront, our content delivery network, really provides all of that scalability and functionality. Now, one of the things about CloudFront that I think is really interesting, we have a little bit different model and architecture than some of the other major CDNs. First of all, we have latency-based routing. So latency-based routing is really going to find the quickest path from those edge servers to your end users and deliver the content the fastest possible way. The other thing that's interesting about CloudFront that's a little bit different, we've had CloudFront in the market for about 3 years now. And what that has enabled us to do is build out a much more modern architecture. Many of the content delivery networks that are out there in the market today have been around for a number of years, 10, 12, 15 years. We've been able to learn from a lot of the things that they've done and build out an architecture that's based on what we call a super pop model. So really what a super pop model is where you have much more centralized resources. So you have a bigger data center. If you talk about number of edge locations, I'll get to this in a minute, but CloudFront has many edge locations around the world. I think Werner mentioned that we have 35 right now. You'll hear some of the other CDN providers talk about how they have thousands of edge locations. Well, that's kind of based on that older architecture where maybe an edge location is like a server rack in the basement of an apartment somewhere. Our model is much more, like I said, kind of that super pop architecture. So what can a content delivery network do for you? Really provides that lowest latency delivery of those media files to your end users, so they have a great experience. It's really all about the experience for the end users. High bandwidth. So when you're trying to deliver content to devices like iPads or PCs or Xboxes or things that can deliver full HD content, you really are pushing a lot of bits through the network. You need to distribute that load across the network and make sure that you can deliver HD quality content to all your end users. The redundancy. So typically if you have just origin server going directly out to end users, if that origin server fails, they're not going to see anything. Content delivery networks like CloudFront really can replicate the content to many different edge locations and many servers within those different edge locations, so that if one server happens to go down, your end users never know the difference. The scalability. So we've seen some graphs throughout the day. Different kind of scalability from an infrastructure perspective, but really what it comes down to is the load at peak for events. So let's say that you have some live event. We've heard a lot about the Olympics today, and we've heard other things, or maybe it's like the UFC. They have an event on Saturday night. There's not a lot of usage throughout the rest of the week, but all of a sudden this event comes along on Saturday night, and this spike happens. How do you deal with that load? So a content delivery network can really provide the scalability so that if you're trying to push that content out to your end users, you don't even have to think about it. You don't have to worry about it. The content delivery network really takes care of all of that for you. Making sure that you have global distribution of your content. So as mentioned, we have 35 edge locations around the world. One of the interesting things about running a content delivery network is that you actually have the ability to see where all the requests are coming from all the end users. It allows us to very quickly create a heat map of where potentially we should build out future edge locations. But it's a great way to see, like, where is the global demand for this different content distribution from a viewer perspective. And then from a cost model, CloudFront is a little bit unique in the CDN space, and one of the reasons why we got into the CDN space was that all of the incumbent CDN players basically force you into these long-term contracts where you had to sign up for a year or 2 years in order to get even kind of moderate pricing. CloudFront is, again, just like all Amazon Web Services. You can sign up in 5 minutes. You can be up and running. You pay as you go. You can turn it off when you're done. It's a very cost-effective solution. So just want to talk a little bit about some of the key features of CloudFront. In general, CloudFront is, as you would expect, an HTTP caching delivery network. One of the interesting features that we have in CloudFront is the ability to quickly and easily set up video streaming, RTMP streaming. So we have what we call a distribution. There's 2 different kinds of distributions in CloudFront. One is a download distribution, which is for HTTP objects like files. The other is a streaming distribution, which is for RTMP streaming. With RTMP streaming and a streaming distribution, you can literally put like an MP4 file into an S3 bucket, start up a CloudFront streaming distribution, point it at that file in the bucket, and be streaming RTMP in less than 5 minutes. You don't have to do anything to actually make that happen. So what's going on behind the scenes there is that we're actually running Adobe Media Server out at our edge locations around the world. So when you go and set up a streaming distribution, it'll pull that file out of the S3 bucket across the network out to the edge location closest to the end users, and then use Adobe Media Server to turn that file into an RTMP stream automatically for you. So if you're running, for instance, like a marketing website and you want to have streaming video up there, 5 minutes later you can have it. It's very simple to do. CloudFront does support both live and VOD, and video on demand streaming. So most people, I think, these days, if they're building out new video streaming architectures, are talking about adaptive bitrate technologies, and I'll get into that a little bit later. While we do have support for RTMP, most people are going to be going with these adaptive bitrate technologies. CloudFront does support streaming both live and video on demand for all the popular formats, so Apple HLS, Adobe HDS, Microsoft Smooth Streaming, upcoming standards like MPEG-Dash. Basically, all of the different formats are fully supported. We do have support for both HTTP and HTTPS delivery. So if you want to do more secure things, you can use that. Private content, we have the ability to assign URLs so you can have even more secure content. One of the things about CloudFront, just like any of the Amazon services, we build out our services with this mentality that the service should be offered programmatically through an API, first and foremost. Some of our services, most of our services, also have a web-based console that you can use to administer it. CloudFront allows you to basically run the whole CDN and set up CNAMEs and do all the things you would do with a CDN programmatically through an API, including things like invalidations. So when you want to get content out of an edge location, let's say the content has changed or updated or things like that, you can programmatically through an API invalidate that instead of having to call somebody up and say, oh, hey, we need to purge the cache out at the edge. So it's a very, again, self-service kind of model, just like we have with all of our other Amazon Web Services. We do provide the ability to do access logs, so all the content that's going through CloudFront and all the requests that are coming in, we can basically put logs into an S3 bucket. And these log files, they're basically XML-based files. You can then churn through those using either tools like Amazon's Elastic MapReduce or partners like Splunk have built out tools where they can actually chew up these log files, provide nice graphs, things like that. So very fine-grained control over auditing and things like that so you can understand what content has flowed through the content delivery network. I already mentioned the management console and full control via the APIs. I really think that's an important part of it. CloudFront is one of those AWS services where you can integrate it into any workflow that you have already existing. You don't have to like rip and replace. It's just very easy API access and you can build it in. So a little bit about our global presence. Right now we have 35 edge locations. We just launched one recently in Milan. As you can see, I think Werner mentioned this earlier, but there's some areas of the map where you don't see these little dots with stars on them. Those are areas where you're going to start to see pretty rapid expansion from us. We started out 2012 with 24 edge locations. We're currently at 35 edge locations 9 months later. So if you think about that in terms of this super pop architecture, these edge locations are full data centers. I mean, they're like big bad data centers that take a long time to build out. We've been on a pace now of putting out a new edge location more than once each month. And we're going to continue to aggressively expand into different parts of the world. From a performance perspective, so I think everybody has probably heard that Amazon is a very data-driven, metrics-driven kind of a company. Most decisions within the company internally are driven by data. You can't just go in and say, I think this is a good idea. You got to have data to back it up. Well, similarly with CDN, because CDN is one of those kind of services that is somewhat commoditized, it comes down to primarily cost and performance. Most of the CDNs have similar functionality these days, so performance becomes a big differentiator, especially when you're talking about companies in the media space that really care a lot about getting a great user experience. It comes down to milliseconds of difference between the different CDNs, but you got to make sure that you're going to have the performance that people need so they have a great experience. So what we did is we actually commissioned a company, Gomez, to do some performance testing for us. And we did it along a number of different axes. So we basically looked at all the different regions in the world, and we said, okay, let's break it down further. Let's look at both backbone delivery performance, so the internet backbone, and let's look at last mile performance, because that's really what matters. It's the to-the-glass performance that really matters for the end user. It doesn't really matter if the backbone's performing well if your end users can't actually see the content very, very quickly with good performance. So we said backbone versus last mile. We then took it one step further, and started looking at, well, there's a difference between if you're delivering small objects, like maybe a JavaScript file that's included in your homepage for your website, that's a very small file, or you're delivering a video file that's a very large object. So let's break it down even further. What we found was across all the different regions, across backbone and last mile, and across large object and small object, that CloudFront compared against, and that the labels aren't really on here, it just says comparison A, B, and C, but it was Akamai and Limelight and level 3 against CloudFront. What we found was that CloudFront consistently was either number 1 or a very close second in all of those categories. And so when you couple that great performance with the transparency of the pricing that we provide and the pay-as-you-go models, it really becomes kind of a no-brainer. So what we're going to talk about now is a use case from the UFC team. So I'm going to invite Christy up here with Gabe and let them talk about how the UFC is using CloudFront and using Amazon Web Services. Now, in the true spirit of the UFC, and I'll let you guys figure this out on your own up here, but the UFC has a saying, 2 may enter, 1 may leave. So with that, I welcome you up.
Do it?
All right.
Hello, I am Christy King. I am the Vice President of Technology Research and Development for Zuffa, which is the parent company that owns the brand Ultimate Fighting Championship, as well as Strike Force, which is on Showtime these days, and a couple other brands, Pride, that's pretty popular in Japan, and some other fight-centric brands. Gabe is the president of Adept Mobi, who's been a partner of ours for a long time, several years, and we've done our best to try to throw every problem humanly possible at these guys. And my one rule is you can't say no. I'll take yes, but you can't say no. So they've helped us solve all kinds of really interesting problems because, of course, our audience is very young. Most of our fans start in their teenage years and usually cap out in their mid-30s. At least that's been true for the last couple of years. That's starting to lengthen as our fans are aging. They seem to be sticking with us, which is good. But we have to keep talking to very, very young people. And lots of those folks don't sit in front of television, as I'm sure many of you have noticed. They're staring at their whatever it is that's in front of their face. It's a gaming console, it's a phone, it's a whatever it is. So we've tried really, really hard to make sure that our content is on any and all devices out there. We don't care what country it is. We don't care kind of at some level how much it costs us to get there. We realize that we have to have at least a small footprint in each of those pieces of technology because that's where our audience is. So we've solved actually two or three pretty big problems all on Amazon's cloud space, but we're going to talk specifically, Gabe and I, about one particular issue we had to solve, and that is actually not on the consumer side, it's on the delivery side. So we work with a handful of folks worldwide who travel to all of the events and capture video. And we feed tons of free content. Far before we ever get to Saturday night and the transactional content, we push out a ton of free content, again, to every device we can possibly figure out how to get it to. Sometimes we host it, sometimes the third parties host it, but in each one of those cases, we have a zillion different formats we have to provide. And again, that's to the consumer end of it. But the first problem is, how do we get it out of the bunker of the basement of a venue somewhere in Ireland or Brazil or wherever the heck we are? Because unlike the NFL and hockey and everywhere else, we're never in the same venue. Every 2 to 3 weeks, we're doing the equivalent of our version of the Super Bowl in a venue we've never been in before. This is not fun. So we have a handful of what we used to call web content developers, but really, by now, it's all the same people. Whether you're doing television or web content, all of those folks, we end up sharing each other's content all the time. So these guys are at the venues, they're running around the hotels, they're running around in the venues, shooting footage of these guys working out, doing the weight cutting, which is really interesting to watch, depending on the weight class, a lot of training, and then, of course, all sorts of interviews, whether it's with fans or the fighters or how you feeling, how you training, what do you think about this or that. We shoot all of that stuff. So what he would do is we kind of jiggered around and figured out some ways to do some editing. A little bit of Final Cut, a little bit of Avid platforms, all on little laptops, winging it. So we've evolved that process over and over and over again, but at the end of the day, we still had to figure out some way to connect to the interwebs and figure out how to get that content from wherever we were to a host point. And that was a pain in our rear for a good 4.5 years. And The biggest problem, of course, with FTP and videos, the thing gets halfway there, crashes, dies, you start over. Halfway there, crashes, dies, start over. Now, you're in Ireland and you have an 11K connection speed. So tomorrow, maybe you got it after it puked and died 3 times, you finally got one file up. I mean, that's just untenable. You can't promise people, web content from wherever you are in the world and expect people to buy a pay-per-view when you kind of at some level can't even get your promotional content to a place that people can consume it. So FTP was a huge problem. We had lots and lots of issues with that. Then, of course, there's the communication piece. The bigger we got, the harder it was for us to say, okay, we finally got this stupid file somewhere where you could get at it, but we added 3 more people in the last 3 days through our very, very busy biz dev people who had signed 2 or 3 more television stations in far-flung countries and didn't know the file was there to take and put in their websites or put in their promotional platforms. So communicate, just simply telling people the file is ready, take it and do something with it was an ongoing problem for us. And then, of course, you have a webmaster in our own place, let alone all the other third parties we deal with. They have to go try to download these files, and a lot of times they'll have their own dropping issues, or they've got to re-encode that material to something that works in their player. So for a long time, we were pushing out one format that may or may not have anything to do with what our promotional partners needed. And of course, that problem just for us, because the sport just keeps getting bigger and bigger, is compounded. So for example, we're in 130 countries right now, just on television. And now about 70% of those also have digital rights. So everything we do has to be provided in both a television broadcast quality format as well as some kind of web-enabled or desktop or game-enabled format. And the issue is because we're trying to get people to do things for us, we have to provide it in their format, or it just kind of tends to get swept under the rug because nobody has enough people to really deal with all of this content anymore. So it behooves us to provide all of our materials in the format that the partner actually needs. So with that, I will stop talking and let Gabe, I should say this really quickly. What he's going to talk about is a solution we essentially came to, which is we needed to be able, obviously, to push the stuff from the worst possible location, which happens more often than not in the States and in Vegas specifically, which is very odd but true. We need to be able to send it from anywhere. And one of the things that we're actually working on that we'll talk about a little bit later is a mobile-specific capture and delivery device process with metadata intact. That's something new we're working on. And of course, the always lovely, I want to make my CFO happy because then he lets me spend more money. So now I'll really stop talking and Gabe will take over.
Okay, thank you. All right, Christy basically laid out sort of the requirements and the goals for the operation. So what we had to do was go out and figure out how we're going to put together a solution like this. And we were fortunate, we had been working with a lot of the Amazon products for a while. And so what we did is we went out and started to examine some of what we felt were the best-in-class products. We obviously had a lot of challenges, and though there were many systems we could stitch together, what we really wanted was something that really sort of worked together and, to their perspective, didn't give them, as they would call it, another login. So in order to make this whole thing work, we decided to really lean on Amazon's products. And what we found was as we leaned on many of their products, many of the third-party systems that we needed to utilize in addition ended up at their root running on Amazon as well. So I'm going to show you a diagram, which is the oversimplified stack here. And so from the first requirement, it was basically we need to be able to get access, find this video that we're uploading. We need to be able to alert, to let people know it's there. And we need to be able to do it on every interface possible. And the real use case there was, while Christy had talked a bunch about the web managers and the content engineers getting that stuff, there's also a whole side of the biz dev side who have no technical knowledge, and they really need to be able to get a hold of this video. And 90% of the time, they're not sitting at their desk. They are running to catch a plane, and they get a call from Fox, and Fox says, "Oh my God, you've got to send me the 155 trailer, and I need it in a mobile format because they're going to run it, they're going to run it on the front of Fox Mobile." Okay, well now I have literally 90 seconds before I get on this plane, and I need to get that file to that person. And so what we ended up building was basically what is commonly referred to as a responsive design, which is HTML5 that essentially adapts to whatever screen size you want to utilize. So that was how we accomplished write one interface and get it to run on any device, desktop, things like that. Now, for our interface, we're not a big shop. We're only about a 10-person company. We can't afford to, and I think Mr. Vogel really spoke about this, we can't afford to mess around with the infrastructure. We don't have the team to be going out and managing a web server and things like that. So we backstop on a platform called Heroku, which at its very core also runs on Amazon's web services. And what it does is it essentially abstracts a lot of what the people here are talking, spinning up EC2 instances, using elastic load balancing, and all of that stuff. Well, what we decided was we don't even want to know about that. What we want is a black box for which we deploy our code to, and then a whole other company that all they do is manage that stuff, take care of. So you basically set it and forget it. We then wanted, for a database solution, something that we didn't have to manage. We didn't want to have to worry about backups. We didn't want to have to worry about restores. We didn't want to have to worry about performance. We basically wanted to park the data somewhere and forget about it and trust that it was going to be there when we needed it. So we basically attach it to Amazon's relational database service. So that provided our interface for Christie's team to basically access it on any device. So the next challenge we had is probably one of the biggest ones, which is they are in parts unknown with a terrible internet connection, and they need to move a file up. Well, if you recall, one of the requirements was it needed to work on everything. So we needed a solution to move it up fast, but we needed something that didn't require a client to be installed and didn't have Flash. So we spoke with Aspera, and luckily at that time, they were just testing out a JavaScript direct to S3 product, which we hopped on and integrated into the responsive design. What that allowed us to do was basically solve the requirements of, one, it's not Flash, and two, you don't have to have a, essentially a pre-configured laptop ready to go. All of that stuff moves up to S3, where basically it sits in a repository. And we've talked a bunch about S3. One of the big advantages to S3 from where it was sitting was simply cost. By moving it here, the cost was 1/10 what they were used to paying. And so once it got to S3, we communicated with a very common encoding solution, encoding.com, which again backstops on Amazon. Essentially, we grab it out of S3, re-encode to whatever formats are required, and drops it back into S3. The final delivery is done by CloudFront. So essentially, once we've gotten the call back from encoding.com, we essentially light up the record in the database so that the biz dev people and whatnot can see that the record is now active. So they can sit there, essentially upload, watch the progress bar, see it hit, it's been uploaded, see the encoding process, boom, once it hits the encoding process, bang, we present them instant links on the page or the ability to forward it to someone. So in this use case with the biz dev person running to the plane, he pulls it up, he authenticates, he goes in, quick search 152, finds it, basically pulls it up, hits send, types in email, and will send the person downstream a URL with basically all of the endpoints, so they can pick up a desktop version, they can pick up the mezzanine version, they can pick up the mobile version, whatever they need, and all of that gets pulled through CloudFront. So if they don't download it and they essentially decide to just drop it as is, there isn't a delivery problem as far as performance, because it's going to be delivered out through CloudFront. And the end user, really, we're showing some devices here, but the end user, as Christy pointed out, could really be, anything, anywhere, anytime. Any third party that they're or partner that they're working with, needs to be able to pick that stuff up and pick it up quick. So that was sort of the stack of solution. And in summary, what I would say is Amazon has created a ecosystem, an environment where what we're seeing is lots of innovation on the edge. And we could have put this solution together with other things, other providers. But in the end, we wanted to leverage Amazon because so much action is happening. So many third parties are developing against their products that from our perspective, it's like a big box of Legos that we can essentially take components and snap them together to build a solution that 5 years ago, you could have gone to a big iron shop like IBM, and they would have built this out for you for $500,000 in 9 months. We were basically able to put this together for an absolute fraction of that cost in 60 days. And so that's, I think the takeaway for us was, wow, if we can stitch this stuff together and provide some glue, then we can really accelerate our development and lower the costs and basically deliver something to the client that meets all of their goals. All right.
So the next thing that happened for us that was pretty cool from all this is we launched our switch, I should say. We switched all of our content hosting from Akamai to Amazon, and in the first 2 months, reduced our just our hosting. Forget about tape, forget about delivery, forget about all those other costs. Just hosting cut the bill 50 grand. I was very popular in the finance office for a couple months. Now they just want more, of course, but I'm working on it. As he said, we can upload, find, send, push video to anybody, anywhere, and most importantly for our organization, because we have 260, 70 people worldwide, all of whom are in production, marketing, or PR. There are no technical people in our building at all, none, zero. Everything we do is done by people who are experts at what they do, what the content is supposed to do. They're not technical people at all. So as he mentioned, one of the things that we're pretty excited about in using the tools that are available on Amazon is that, yes, the cost saving is fantastic and that's cool, but really what that means is that then I have more capital to go spend on the next thing. And that's really, really important in the land of marketing, I think, for anybody that's in media, is we need to figure out ways to pull in content from other places. So, for example, one of the things that we're working on next that I'll just mention quickly, and we'll be here through the night, through the reception, so if you guys have more questions about this, we'll be happy to talk about it. We're moving most of our digital asset management proxies to the cloud. In fact, we already have. We're just finalizing some of the connections between our local digital asset management process and what we're storing in the cloud. And the last piece that we're working on is a project that's come to be called Worm, just because. And it's a mobile process to take in content from, let's say, all of the fighters. If they all had this app sitting on their phone, it would be a way for us to gather content to support things like social media efforts, which, of course, if any of you are tied to that, it's something you have to feed endlessly. It's every 2, 3, 4 hours. And if you tried to dedicate production people to editing and putting those sorts of things together, you couldn't ever do it. There's too many different formats, too many different phones. All these guys speak different languages, and these guys are also on networks that are all over the world. So we're trying to build a process to take in all of that content and then do the next piece, which is really important, which is attach automated metadata processes, because a phone can tell you things like, where are they? Who are they? How long was this file? Again, as somebody mentioned earlier this morning, it's not about gigabytes or terabytes. As in the media world, you need to know how long something is. Is it a minute? Is it 2 minutes? Is it 5 minutes? What is it? And then when we get that material up, we need to have a very clear interface that non-technical people can pull up a web page type display and be able to quickly figure out what are the 2 or 3 most important things I should look at first or search for first that's relevant to the thing I need to promote today. So I think we can do this and figure out how to do it in a pretty clever way in the mobile space. And then I think it has pretty far-reaching implications for how you figure out to prioritize what you look at. I think in media world, a lot of you would recognize that as the logging situation. You have to assign so many people to go through and kind of log what's in a bunch of footage so that you can decide what's important about it, what do you pull out, what becomes a highlight, what is something you can use today. But in the social media space, you have to be able to make that decision in minutes or hours, not days or weeks. So we've got to figure out a way to speed up that search and find and help me prioritize what I should look at first so that I make sure and put that content out to the world and help me sell my next event. So those are kind of 3 of the ways that we're using the Amazon platform to do all kinds of stuff in media. And like I said, we'll be around so we can talk about it if anybody has questions. And that's it. We're done. Sorry.
Oops. Okay. Thanks, Gabe and Christy. That was great. You know, I was looking around the room, and I think we might have had space enough up here to set up an octagon cage, so maybe next time. I want to spend a couple minutes talking about, I know we've had a lot of great partners up here, and, listening to the Uplink guys talk about their very elegant solution. What I want to do now is spend a few minutes kind of behind the scenes of those elegant solutions and talk about if you potentially wanted to roll your own video streaming solution on AWS infrastructure. So I've put together kind of a marketecture diagram, if that's a word, basically showing what it would look like if you wanted to stream content in sort of the main popular adaptive bitrate streaming formats. So Apple HLS, Adobe HDS, and Microsoft Smooth Streaming. So I've basically, let's see if I can figure out how to make this pointer thing work. Hey, look at that. So I've basically set up, kind of 3 areas here for each of those technology streaming formats. So what it's really showing here, I'm kind of starting at the file segmentation level. So what it doesn't show here is, how you actually get a stream, whether it's a live stream or maybe a file-based, VOD situation. How those get transcoded, or if you wanted to do, if you wanted to use a partner like ByDRM to do encryption, things like that aren't really, aren't really in the scope of this diagram. This basically takes it from after the file has been transcoded, typically into an H.264 stream. Each of these, in the live case, each of these takes a different mechanism for bringing the content into the segmentation tools. So for Apple HLS, they're going to use MPEG-2 transport stream. Adobe HDS for bringing in live stream, it's going to be over RTMP. Microsoft Smooth Streaming is going to bring it in over Smooth Streaming Live protocol. But basically, there's ways to get these live streams into the different tools. So as I look through each of these formats, there's different tools that are provided. So Apple provides basically the Apple file or stream segmenter tools. Now those tools run on OS X, but basically spit out manifest files and video chunk files. Those files, those chunks in the manifest, can literally be dumped into a bucket on Amazon S3, hooked up to a CloudFront download distribution, and be streaming HLS right, as easily as that. On the HDS side from Adobe, a couple of different things you can do. They also have some command line tools. So there's a file packager and a live packager. You can also do streams directly into the Adobe Media Server, and it will spit out these chunks as well. So you can run Adobe Media Server on an EC2 instance. So one of the really cool things about running Adobe Media Server on EC2 is that we've worked with Adobe to set up a pay-as-you-go model for running Adobe Media Server. It used to be that you would have to buy these perpetual licenses for each instance of Adobe Media Server that you wanted to run, and the licenses were not completely inexpensive, but now what you can do is you can start up these Adobe Media Server instances running on top of EC2 for a very inexpensive pay-as-you-go model. It's a $5 one-time setup fee, $5 a month, and then there's kind of an uplift price per hour price on top of the EC2 per hour price. But what it lets you do is you can run Adobe Media Server in that pay-as-you-go model. So it makes it really accessible for people. Same thing with Microsoft Smooth Streaming. You can run basically a Windows server running IIS media services on an EC2 instance, be delivering smooth streaming, hook it up to CloudFront. Everything works just great for both live and VOD. As you can see, we've connected that to CloudFront. This is basically this block is kind of talking about CloudFront as an abstract service. What we've got here are different CloudFront edge locations. So these might be for users that are in London. This might be out of our Ireland location, or different locations of our edge servers around the world. Obviously, there's more than 3, so this is just kind of representative of 3 groups of users in different parts of the world. Now, what I want to do in this next slide is kind of dig into how you would go about setting up Adobe Media Server for live streaming. So one of the things that we've done is worked closely with Adobe to create an automated way to start up a live streaming solution based on Adobe Media Server. So what we call this is a CloudFormation template. And think of it basically as a script of setting up the different resources that you need. So starting up an EC2 instance, running Adobe Media Server, hooking it up to CloudFront, setting up all the URLs, basically scripting through setting this thing up so that it's templatized. So if you want to set one up right now, you can just click the button. It takes you through a wizard. You answer a few questions. It pops out basically a running instance of all of these resources required to do a live streaming solution. But what you can do is you can use that template over and over and over again if you want to set up different additional live streaming solutions. So what we've got here, and I'll just kind of walk through this quickly, but basically you start with your video source that's maybe feeding into Adobe Flash Media Live encoder. The CloudFormation template, what that really is going to do here is start up EC2 instance running Adobe Media Server. You're going to set up, it's going to ask you to provide your key pair, or you can set that up as part of the process. It starts up the CloudFront distribution, CloudFront download distribution, connects it all up. You have to set up your security groups, very simple to do, and then it basically has it all ready to go. So when you get done with this, here's a screenshot basically showing the output of it after you've run this CloudFormation script. So this CloudFormation script, there's different tabs and things here, but this is the output tab. It basically says, okay, well, here's your Adobe Media Server, and here's the URL to access it. Here's the the stream publishing location. Here's the stream name. Here's the manifest if you want to do HDS or HLS, and that's actually a good point. Adobe Media Server and Microsoft IIS Media Services both deliver not only HDS and smooth streaming respectively, but they both now also support delivering HLS content for Apple devices and newer Android devices. So this is actually going to point you out the HDS manifest, the HLS manifest for iOS devices, all of the different parts that you need, admin console access, but it basically has set up everything for you. It takes about 10 minutes to run that script, and you're ready to go. So it's super easy to set these things up on your own if you aren't using a partner solution that kind of abstracts away a lot of that stuff. When you get done with this, you have full control over the server and over all the resources. So you can log into that server just like it was a server in your own data center or running under your desk or whatever. You have full control over all the knobs and dials and configuration and things like that. So a very easy way to get live streaming solutions set up. So with that, oh, my demo's not working. I had a demo I was going to show you. I'll talk a little bit about it. So while I'm talking, hopefully Marcin can get it working. So no pressure. Earlier today, through a partnership with some of our great partners, including Adobe, All Digital, they built out a solution it launched earlier today that basically is a live streaming solution at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. So it's basically a camera pointed at the fish swimming around in the aquarium, a live feed of this thing. Now, you might say, oh, big deal, it's just a live stream. The really cool thing about this is we were going to show this on an iPad. It's delivering to a native iPad application. It's not delivering to a Flash application. which is maybe not that big of a deal. But what it's doing is it's using protected HDS. So Adobe Media Server, newer versions, have this DRM technology called protected HDS. They also have their separate product, their higher end product for DRM called Adobe Access. But the newer Flash Media Server, Adobe Media Server product has a built-in protection DRM scheme that's called protected HDS that enables you to do content protection to things like an iPad with basically just turn on a checkbox. You don't have to have a separate license server. It's not it's not a separate certificates and things like that. But what we're able to show on this demo is those streams coming out of Adobe Media Server, going to an iPad device into a native application, being fully protected, and very easy to set that up. Okay, well, we've at least got a screenshot of it.
That's a Wi-Fi issue, not. Can you switch that?
Can we switch the video over to the iPad? He's not getting a signal. There it is. Okay, so here, this gives you an idea of kind of what the user experience looks like. Normally, these fish aren't frozen in the water here. But again, I think it's a pretty cool scenario where you can be delivering, through Adobe Media Server, delivering protected HDS content using, the PHDS content protection system directly to a native iPad application. So this stream is live as of today. I think we can probably provide the URL, or maybe you can just Google for it and find it. But it's an app that you can download. So you can check it out, maybe after the show. One last thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention earlier as I was going through the CloudFront performance data. We did actually put out a white paper with Forrester that talks about, Frost and Sullivan, that talks about all the performance stuff that I talked about as far as different regions and large object versus small object and all the different backbone versus last mile. So we've got that white paper available both online and we've actually got some printouts out in the hallway at we've got a little table out there. So feel free to check those out. With that, I do have a little bit of time if anybody has any questions. Happy to take questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it back over to the next speaker. Yes?
Did you say earlier that the HLS delivery can happen as a video on demand?
Yeah, so the question was, can HLS delivery happen as video on demand? Yeah, absolutely. So the neat thing about these adaptive bitrate formats from a CDN perspective is that the CDN doesn't know or care that it's video. It just sees them as HTTP cacheable objects. So whether it's live or on demand, the tools that Apple provided for the segmentation is basically just creating these video chunks and manifest files that can then be stored up on S3 and accessed directly through the CDN, or directly even if you didn't want to go through a CDN. But yeah, both live and on demand.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Or more of a problem, because we currently use CloudFront to deliver our media.
Okay.
And one of the problems that we found is that we're assigning URLs to deliver the media onto our website. However, we want to be able to share videos, say on Facebook.
Right.
And because of Facebook's caching, issues and stuff, how do we rectify that problem? One of the things that I found, and I wanted to know if this is something coming down the pipeline from CloudFront, is the utilization of HTTP referring domain names.
Yeah, so why don't we follow up with that offline after. We've actually got some of the CloudFront product management team here in the audience today, so I'll get you introduced to them and we can dig into getting that solved. Okay, any other questions? Silence, everybody's just waiting for the happy hour cocktails, huh? Okay, well thank you everybody, and oh, one more question.
If you're using the FMS or Adobe Media System 4.5, whatever they're calling these days, on EC2, and you want to do protected HDS,
Yes.
instead of streaming straight from that instance, can it connect to CloudFront and take the edge locations?
Yeah, so I think the question you're asking is, can CloudFront handle protected HDS? Or?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually what this Monterey Bay aquarium application is doing. So that's going through CloudFront. The protection is happening kind of in Adobe Media Server, and I think Kevin is still here in the audience somewhere from Adobe, but I have to put $1 in the bucket every time I call it FMS again. So I know where you're at with that, but yeah. So the protection actually is happening, in Adobe Media Server, and then it's delivering those encrypted video chunks out through CloudFront. And like I said, CloudFront doesn't know or care that it's video. It doesn't know or care that it's encrypted. Those keys, basically on the client side, on the iOS, an iPad side, is able to decrypt that. It's sort of native built into the iPad operating system level.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Great. Well, I will then turn it back over to Reed to bring up our next speaker. Thank you, everyone.
That was awesome.